What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.
The first item of business is general questions, and at question number 1 I call Rhoda Grant.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will conduct an independent review into the maternity model in Caithness.
Cabinet Secretary Humza Yousaf.
The maternity model in Caithness was put in place by NHS Highland. That was following a review led by Professor Hugo van Worden, then the NHS Highlands Director of Public Health, following the tragic death of a full-term baby at the unit in 2015. The report of the review, which included 2 external reviews, recommended that the maternity unit in Caithness move to a midwife-led unit to address safety issues. This change was unanimously agreed by the NHS Highland Board. The model of care that operates in Caithness is of course similar to models that operate in other parts of NHS Highland and indeed other NHS boards in Scotland. The member will be aware of the work that's underway in the Best Start North review, commissioned jointly by Grampian Highland and 3 island health boards. The work of the review group was paused during COVID, but has recently restarted, led by the directors of midwifery from all 6 northern boards.
Rhoda Grant.
The Cabinet Secretary has carried out independent reviews of Murray maternity services and now has commenced one in Dumfries and Galloway. The review carried out by NHS Highland was not independent of NHS Highland, and concerns around the maternity services have been ongoing since that change was made back in 2016 when obstetric cover was removed. Women are having to travel over 100 miles to give birth. That's like asking a woman from Edinburgh to travel to Newcastle to give birth, and that's absolutely unacceptable. So will he stop the centralisation of maternity services away from Caithness, admit it was a mistake, and commit to having a full independent review as soon as possible?
Cabinet Secretary.
I really regret Ms Grant's tone in terms of her question, or even her implication. That it's important for us to remember, as I stated in my original answer, that the review was carried out after the really tragic death of a full-term baby at the unit in 2015. That was the circumstances behind why there was a review, and of course that review did include 2 external reviews as part of the overall review. And that review, on the basis, in the back of that very tragic death, then recommended that Caithness move to a midwife-led unit to address those safety issues. Ms Grant is also wrong to say that I've commissioned an independent review in relation to maternity services in Wigtonshire. The local health board has. decided to commence an independent review into maternity services in Wigtonshire on the 18th of January. Now, that is a decision for the Health Board. The Health Board in Highland, of course, are part of the Best Start North review, which will, of course, look at how maternity services, how they operate right across Highland, and I hope that Rhoda Grant will undoubtedly collaborate and take part in that review.
Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm if the Scottish Government has reviewed the conclusions of the risk assessment for each maternity patient who is in labour that has been transferred from Caithness General to Raigmore Hospital? And if not, will he?
Cabinet Secretary.
Again, these are important decisions and important risk assessments for local health boards to take. And what I would say is, of course, I understand the concerns that are raised legitimately by Edward Mountain, raised by Rhoda Grant. I myself have met the campaign group chat last year, and as a result of that, I know there's now face-to-face formal meetings between NHS Highland and the campaign group. But NHS Highland does have in place protocols in place to mitigate the risks that are associated with the transfer of pregnant women, particularly in an emergency situation. So those protocols are in place. The Best Start North review has commenced, and I would encourage, as I have encouraged Rhoda Grant, I would encourage Edward Mountain to engage in that review.
Question number 2, Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the development of a Menopause Specialist Network.
Minister Marie Todd.
The action in the Women's Health Plan to develop a national menopause specialist network has been completed. The network has been meeting since 2021 to provide consistent advice, peer support and share good practice amongst healthcare professionals, including primary care teams. The network meets on a quarterly basis and includes representatives from all mainland NHS boards.
Gillian Martin.
I thank the Minister for that answer. It was recently estimated that in the UK over 900,000 employees left their jobs over an undefined period because of the impact of menopause symptoms. In addition to better clinical support for women during menopause, better understanding and support is needed in workplaces. Now, I know I'm potentially creeping into another minister's remit here, but I would like to ask if, in the spirit of cross-portfolio working, if some work could be done within the Women's Health Brief to better inform workplaces on the menopause and get meaningful policies in place, perhaps starting with our own NHS, which after all employs many women we cannot afford to lose from the workplace.
Minister.
Our Women's Health Plan highlights the need to consider women as rounded individuals with a range of needs, and we are committed to working across portfolios to achieve our aim of reducing health inequalities and improving health outcomes for women, including in the workplace. Menopausal women are the fastest growing demographic in the workforce, so it's important, and more important now than ever, to speak openly about menopause at work. Through the Women's Health Plan, we're developing support for both employers and those experiencing symptoms of the menopause, and that includes menopause and menstrual health workplace policy for NHS Scotland as an example of best practice to promote across the public, private and third sector.
Jackie Bailey.
Last week, the Scottish Government published its Women's Health Progress Report, which was delayed by 6 months. Can the Minister explain why the establishment of a dedicated menopause policy post has not been achieved? Because in the Government's own implementation plan, this was classed as a short-term action, so it should have been delivered within the year. When will an appointment be made?
Minister.
So I'm very proud of the progress we've made in the first year of the Women's Health Plan, and of course Scotland was the first country in the UK to put forward a Women's Health Plan. I have been very clear from the moment I took this post that actually we have a great deal of work to do to overturn the millennia of discrimination and disadvantage that women face. I think we've done great work on menopause. We've put forward, as I said in my previous answer, the access to a specialist menopause workforce. We have busted myths about the menopause on our NHS Inform website, and I'm really proud of the progress that we've made. I'm happy to update Jackie Bailey in writing with the specific question that she asked.
Question number 3, Jamie Greene.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what steps it is taking to support young people with speech difficulties.
Cabinet Secretary Hamza Yousaf.
We want to intervene early to prevent speech difficulties arising in young people. An important part of our efforts to address this has been to increase our health visiting workforce by more than 500 since 2014 and expand funded early learning and childcare to the 1140 hours to all eligible children. Both are critical to supporting children's early language development. We also recognise the importance of timely access to speech and language therapy. We've increased the flexibility health boards have in reducing waiting times, ensuring those with the greatest need are seen first, while maximising prevention and early intervention approaches for those who are waiting.
Jamie Greene.
The Cabinet Secretary talks about early intervention, but the reality is there's a 2-year waiting list in North Ayrshire to see a children's speech therapist. In fact, the list is now closed and parents are having to go private and pay for assistance for their children. There's a 2-tier system of speech therapy in Scotland due to chronic underfunding and a nationwide lack of speech therapists. I'm sure members across the Chamber will be experiencing similar issues. Minister, how have we let things get so bad? Early intervention is absolutely key to the learning and development of young people. But if there's a 2-year waiting list, then the outcomes are going to be much, much poorer. Will the Cabinet Secretary reflect on this, and what's he going to do about it?
Cabinet Secretary.
I won't just reflect on it, we'll make sure we take action in this regard. And he is right, of course, to raise the issue around Ayrshire and Arran. I know about the specific challenges Ayrshire and Arran have had with recruitment. In fact, they've lost some staff in their speech and language therapy department. And what I've asked the Chief Allied Health Professionals Officer to do is to engage directly with the board, and she has asked them Ayrshire and Arran to resume the waiting list for routine referrals, because I know that was an issue of concern. I understand the decision Ayrshire and Arran took to close the list for routine referrals. It's important to say that that never affected urgent referrals. Urgent referrals still being seen, and in fact the average referral to assessment time is 4 days. In terms of where I don't agree with Jamie Greene is his suggestion that the NHS has been chronically underfunded. That is incorrect. Of course, we are putting record investment in our NHS with a record £19 billion for 23-24.
Question number 4, Liam McArthur.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the work of the Ferries Task Force with Orkney Islands Council.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, the Transport Minister and I had a useful meeting with representatives of Orkney Islands Council earlier this week. We discussed a range of matters about how best to support the Council with the challenges it faces in delivering its ferry responsibilities, and we look forward to continuing discussions.
Liam McArthur.
Can I thank the Deputy First Minister for that answer? Welcome the meeting on Tuesday, and given how late in the day the meeting was arranged, welcome the fact that I think a further meeting is due to take place in April. It is important, vital I would say, that Ministers remain involved in this process. And given the impact on island communities in Orkney of increased disruption to services due to the age of the internal ferry fleet, not to mention the costs and the impact through higher emissions, what confidence, what reassurance can the Deputy First Minister offer my constituents that this is a process that will lead ultimately to a funding package that will allow the replacement of that fleet?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think the fact that the work is underway should be reassurance to Mr McArthur's constituents. I recognise the significance of the issues involved and the necessity of there being reliable inter-island ferries and connections for his constituents. We have embarked on the work that is necessary to explore these issues, and we look forward to sustain that work with Orkney Islands Council.
Jamie Halcrow-Johnston.
I'm pleased this meeting has finally taken place and that the talks were, at least in the Scottish Government's own finest ministerial techno-speak, positive and constructive. However, I'm not aware of any agenda being published ahead of the meeting. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary to ensure full transparency of the discussions, and so that local residents in Orkney can have confidence that this isn't just another talking shop and, or as one local councillor put it, a placating tactic? When will full detailed minutes of the meeting be publicly available, and when will the agenda for the next talks be published?
Cabinet Secretary.
It's nice to see that Mr Halcrow-Johnston is able to summon up a really warm welcome for the Government's dialogue with Orkney Islands Council. It really is another further further descent into the miserableism of the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. There is an abundance of miserableism on the Scottish Conservative benches. If
you could answer the question briefly, please.
Presiding Officer, as with all things, there will be full transparency from the Scottish Government.
Thank you, members.
I do.
Members, we will hear the Cabinet Secretary. We will hear the Cabinet Secretary. We have a finite amount of time and a lot of interest, and I would be grateful if we could get through business. Cabinet Secretary.
And there's a finite time that we've got to put up with the nonsense we get from the Scottish Conservatives. I simply reiterate, Presiding Officer, that the Government will apply full transparency to all of the deliberations we have with Orkney Islands Council.
Thank you. Question number 5, John Mason.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on whether any increased number and cost of commissions and commissioners for which it is responsible will mean resources being diverted away from frontline services.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, the financial resources sought by such office holders to support their respective functions are provided for in relevant Acts of Parliament, which is a matter for the Parliament. It is a simple matter of fact, however, that the more office holders there are and the more resources they utilise, the less will be available for public services. I have been open with Parliament about the scale of the pressures we currently face in the public finances, and it is vital that all public bodies and office holders contain their costs.
John Mason.
Thank you, Deputy First Minister, for that response. It's been suggested that we might be heading towards 14 commissioners. And I wonder if he would agree that perhaps it means that some sectors with a commissioner have a louder voice and other sectors without a commissioner are not heard so well.
Cabinet Secretary.
President Officer, this is a difficult issue for the Government to judge upon, because essentially the legislation to establish commissioners are matters for Parliament. And Parliament also, through the work of the Scottish Parliamentary Corporate Body, has to regulate or advise on the regulation of the financial assistance that is made available to office holders. And that's a difficult issue for the Government to control, because it would potentially have the Government intruding on the right and proper space that is available for Parliament to determine these issues. And I'm acutely conscious of the necessity to respect that boundary. Having said that, all of us, whether we are members of the Government or members of the opposition, have a duty to recognise the pressures that exist on the public finances, and that should be reflected in the financial support that is available to office holders and the number of office holders that we have in place.
Question number 6, Ros McCall.
To ask the Scottish Government what impact its Town Centre Action Plan is having in communities in Mid-Scotland and Fife region.
Minister Tom Arthur.
In Mid-Scotland and Fife, the Scottish Government is delivering on town centre action with more than £22 million of funding provided to local authorities for local projects since 2019 through our place-based investment programme and town centre fund. A further £4.5 million is being invested through the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund over the period 2020-2023 alone. We are also supporting community wealth building pilots in Fife, and we are working collaboratively with the Coalfields Regeneration Trust in the area on climate action.
Ros McCall.
I appreciate the response from the Minister, but I think he's missing the point. I've asked this question in 3 different ways, 2 in writing and again today, and I keep getting told that we have a plan and another plan, but the plans are not working.
We will briefly suspend business at this point. Thank you. If we may recommence, and if Minister Tom McArthur could complete his response to Ms McCall. Thank you.
Presiding Officer, I had completed my response. It was a supplementary.
Sorry, excuse me. Ms McCall.
Thank you. I do appreciate the response from the Minister, but I think he misses the point. I've asked this question in 3 different ways, 2 writing and again twice today. And I keep getting told that we have a plan and another plan, but the plans are not working. Shop vacancy rates remain unchanged, with 1 in 6 stores in our high streets lying empty. That's the highest in the UK. The volume of empty units in shopping centres remain at more than 20%. That's completely unchanged. Calls from the industry bodies to match the 75% rates relief for small businesses to match the rest of the United Kingdom are being ignored. So what tangible evidence does the Minister have that these multiple plans will make any impact whatsoever on the communities in Mid-Scotland and Fife?
Minister.
I'm grateful to the member for the supplementary question. This is a complex area. Our town centres face systemic challenges going back many, many years, and of course they have faced the acute crises of the pandemic and indeed the current cost crisis. Now, there's 3 aspects in terms of how we address that. There is clear strategic direction, which we are providing. There is partnership working with COSLA and local communities, and of course there is funding, which I outlined in my original answer. There is going to be no short-term fix, no overnight solution to the challenges that our town centres face. It is not unique to Scotland that we have a strategic approach through our town centre action plan, through our retail strategy and through our community wealth building aspirations. And indeed, I launched a consultation on community wealth building earlier this week. And we see in Mid-Scotland and Fife, in Clackmannanshire and in Fife, pilot areas supported by the Scottish Government. This is a complex area. We are providing funding. We are working in partnership. And I extend an invitation to the member, and indeed any member who wishes to discuss these complex issues in more detail.
Thank you, Minister.
I am more than happy to meet to do so.
That concludes topical questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and at question number 1, I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The public have rightly been outraged that a double rapist changed their gender after being charged by the police. This week, the Justice Secretary, Keith Brown, was asked if that rapist should now be considered a woman. This is what Keith Brown said. I think that is the case. We have to accept people identify, as in this case, as women. Does the First Minister agree with her Justice Secretary?
First Minister.
I think that rapist should be considered a rapist. That is what I think. That individual has been convicted of rapes, and that therefore is the terminology. I'm not going to get into the individual circumstances of that particular individual's claims to be a woman, because I don't have enough information about that. But the individual has been convicted of serious sex offences, and that is the relevant consideration in terms of which prison they should be accommodated in. Can I say briefly, Presiding Officer, in addition to this, these issues have obviously had great public and media attention in recent days, but these issues are not new, nor have the arrangements within the prison service for dealing with transgender prisoners changed in any way. As the chair of the Scottish Prison Officers Association said this week, the Scottish Prison Service has been making risk-based decisions about the accommodation of trans prisoners for many years, and indeed they have been doing that effectively and safely. The risk assessment processes in the cases that have been reported in recent days were underway. It is not the case that any decision had been taken to allow either of those to serve their sentences in women's prisons. However, given the nature of the coverage and the potential for that to cause concern, I think the reality for that to cause concern amongst women prisoners and the general population, and indeed to cause distress in the trans community, the overwhelming majority of whom, like the overwhelming majority of the general population, never commit any offences, led us to clarify the matter and put it beyond doubt. And the position now, of course, pending the review that was already underway, is that no transgender prisoner with a history of violence, including sexual violence against women, will be housed in or transferred to a women's prison. I think that is what is important, and I think it is that clarity that matters to the public.
Douglas Ross.
The First Minister's final words there were about clarity. I think that answer was anything but clear. Her Justice Secretary is very clear that he thinks a double rapist is a woman. He has enough information to come to that conclusion. The First Minister says she doesn't have enough information to come to that conclusion. But I do want to look at an area where we agree. Trans people are not the problem here. But here's where we disagree. When a man rapes two women, we don't think that he should be considered a woman just because he says so. We should call out criminals like this who are abusing the system. They are not trans people. They are dangerous and violent men. Adam Graham, who wants to be known as Isla Bryson, raped two women. He is an abusive man seeking to exploit loopholes in the government's current policy. Nicola Sturgeon's answer to me was she wants to call a rapist. But can she just give me a clear answer to my question, not what she wants to answer, but what I want to ask her? Is this double rapist a woman?
First Minister.
This individual claims to be a woman. What I said is that I don't have information about whether those claims have validity or not. But I don't think Douglas Ross and I are disagreeing here, because what I think is relevant in this case is not whether the individual is a man or claims to be a woman or is trans. What is relevant is that the individual is a rapist. That is how the individual should be described, and it is that that should be the main consideration in deciding how the individual is dealt with. That is why, of course, the individual is in a male prison, not in the female prison. So these are the issues that matter. Douglas Ross also talks about current policy. I accept he hasn't done this today, but I have read many things in recent days that have tried to conflate the situation in prisons with the legislation passed overwhelmingly by this Parliament before Christmas. Of course, the two are not connected, and they wouldn't be connected even if that legislation was in force, which it is not. The current policy, which is, in my understanding, broadly similar to the approaches taken in other jurisdictions, has been in place in the Scottish Prison Service since 2014. And as the chair of the Prison Officers Association said himself this week, the Prison Service has been taking risk-based decisions about transgender prisoners for many years, and they have been doing that safely and effectively. And that is what they should continue to do, albeit with the presumptions that were set out for clarity at the weekend.
Douglas Ross.
The First Minister's right. I haven't mentioned the GRR bill at all. I'm speaking about the current government policy, the Scottish Government policy I have in front of me here, which states it is the view of the Scottish Government that trans women are women. It's the view of her Justice Secretary that a double rapist is a woman. I'm not sure what the First Minister's view on that is, because she says there's no disagreement between herself and I on this. There is a massive disagreement. I believe a double rapist, anyone who rapes a woman, is a man. They cannot be considered anything else. And Presiding Officer, this all matters for very good reasons. It matters because what happens when violent criminals like Adam Graham get out of prison? Under Nicola Sturgeon's current government policies, the ones I've just spoken about that she raised, he is considered a woman. That means sex offenders like him can keep forcing their way into women's spaces. Adam Graham was already able to access a beauty class after raping two women. 21-year-old Rachel Ferguson was in that class with him and told a newspaper this: "It really scares me to look back and realise that he was watching me with no clothes on after being charged with this. It makes me feel physically sick and violated." This is a fundamental question about women's safety. I refuse to trust the word of a rapist. Why does the First Minister?
First Minister.
I don't, and nothing I have said suggests that I do. But can I set out the reality here. And I think it is important that in rightly dealing with and me answering questions about this individual case, very serious individual case, we also remember, and it does bear repetition, that trans women are a very tiny proportion of our society, but the overwhelming number of them never commit any offences of any description, just like it is true for the overwhelming majority of the general population. And in dealing with individuals like this, who have to be dealt with very seriously, it is important that we don't inadvertently undermine the rights of the law-abiding majority of trans people in our country. And I think that is an important principle that we mustn't lose sight of. But rapists should be dealt with as rapists. I don't think there is any disagreement on that, and I don't think it does service to the victims of crime to suggest that we somehow do disagree on that issue. In terms of access to single-sex spaces, it is also the case that under current law, under the current Equality Act, which of course is legislation reserved to the UK Parliament, there are provisions to exclude trans women from single-sex spaces. And those exemptions can be applied whether or not a trans woman has a gender recognition certificate. So it's important that as we discuss these important issues, we do so firstly calmly, and I recognise we're having a calm exchange right now, but that we also do it without misrepresenting, even inadvertently, the position, because I don't think that does a service to the trans community more generally, but I don't think it does a service to the victims of male violence against women, and it doesn't do any service to the population at large. The final point I would remind Douglas Ross of, which is a point I have made before, and I don't stand here pretending to speak for them, but organisations like Rape Crisis Scotland, like Scottish Women's Aid, these are organisations that deal day and daily with women who have been the victims of male violence against them. Not only were they supportive of the legislation, but they deal with these issues and they deal with the situation around trans women each and every day. And I think all of us could do with listening more to them, because they are in many respects the experts in their field.
Douglas Ross.
We are having a calm debate, and I think that is right for this sensitive issue. But I am feeling frustrated, as I was last week, that I've asked the First Minister repeatedly for an answer that she refuses to give. Under law, a rapist has to be a man. Her Justice Secretary thinks this rapist is a woman, and I'd just like, in my final opportunity to the First Minister, to get a clear answer. Is Adam Graham, this double rapist, a man or a woman? Now, let's remember, in court, this man lied. He was telling people he didn't rape two women. But under Nicola Sturgeon's policy, he's believed when he claims to be a woman. So he can keep on demanding access to women's spaces. He can keep forcing victims to call him she. He can keep terrifying and traumatising women. I know there's murmurings from the SNP benches, so I would ask them and the First Minister to listen to the words of one of Adam Graham's victims. This survivor was raped by him and said this on Sunday: "I don't believe a word. I don't believe he's truly transgender. I feel as if he's made a mockery out of them using it. As far as I'm concerned, that was to make things easier for himself. I'm sure he's faking it." And this brave woman summed up the feeling of the majority of people in Scotland when she said this: "You've got genuine cases where people are desperate to get reassignment for the right reasons because they've been born into that body, not because they've raped two people and decided that that's an easy way out." First Minister, why are you giving rapists an easy way out?
First Minister.
I do think that does a disservice to victims of crime. Can I say a number of things, because they are all extremely important. The quote that Douglas Ross narrated there, my feeling is that is almost certainly the case, which is why the key factor in this case is not the individual's claim to be a woman. The key and in fact, only important factor in this case is that the individual has been convicted of rape. Yeah. The individual is a rapist, and that is the factor that should be the deciding one in decisions about how that prisoner is now treated. And indeed, that is what is happening in terms of where the prisoner is. Secondly, Douglas Ross has on more than one occasion today used the terminology of forcing access to women's-only spaces. These are important considerations, but that language ignores the exemptions under the current equality law, a law that even if this Parliament wanted to, couldn't change. Exemptions that enable trans women to be excluded from single-sex spaces where the tests in that legislation are met, and to be excluded regardless of whether or not they have a gender recognition certificate. The other thing that Douglas Ross's questions ignore is the fact that for any sex offenders on release of prison, there are monitoring arrangements, the MAPA, the well-established MAPA arrangements, to ensure that any continuing risk posed by individuals, regardless of gender, are properly managed. So it is really important that we look seriously at all of these issues, but that in doing so, we bear in mind two things. Firstly, as I've said, that we do not further stigmatise trans people generally, and I think that is important. But secondly, that we don't cause undue concern amongst the public. If there are issues to be addressed, we address them, but we do that in a way that is not just calm, but doesn't misrepresent the situation, because that is in nobody's interest. And I think if all of us come at these debates in that spirit, then we can work our way through all of these issues, respecting the rights of those whose rights deserve to be respected, but also protecting the public, and women in particular, from men who want to and do commit violent acts against them.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, for the past 15 years, this government has shortchanged local councils. It didn't matter if the Scottish Government's budget went up or down, local authorities had their budgets cut, and now they are at financial breaking point. Two of Scotland's most senior councillors said this week council services face being either significantly reduced, cut or stopped altogether. Local authorities will have to consider cutting pupil support staff, libraries, youth work and other vital services. Are these councillors wrong?
First Minister.
Councillors are not wrong to say that we live in times of real financial difficulty and constraint. That's true of the Scottish Government, and it is absolutely true of councils across our country. This time every year, I think I made this comment a couple of weeks ago, we hear these kind of questions as councils look at options put before them. Often these options are not taken forward, but it is important that all councils look carefully at how they balance their budgets, but do that in a way that also fulfils their priorities. In the budget for the financial year about to start, and of course Parliament will debate the budget at stage 1 this afternoon, we are proposing an increase in the resources available to local government of over £570 million. That's a real terms increase of £160 million. So times are difficult for local government, but within the constrained financial resources that we have, of course resources increased by decisions we are also taking and proposing to Parliament to ask those who earn the most to pay a bit more. We are treating local government as fairly as we possibly can. The final point I would make, Presiding Officer, and it's an invitation to Anna Sarwar and to anyone across the Chamber. If there is a proposition to give more money as we go through this budget process to local government, by all means come and make that suggestion, but tell us where in the budget we should take that money from. That's the only grown-up and mature way to come to budget deliberations.
Anna Sarwar.
Why are these councillors considering budget cuts? They're considering cuts because of decisions made by this government. £6 billion of core budget cuts since 2013-14. And those words I quoted were the words of SNP councillors Shona Morrison and Katie Hagman, the President and Resource spokespersons of COSLA. Two SNP councillors brave enough to say out loud what this SNP government knows is the truth. Councillor Hagman also said councils are left with little choice other than to potentially raise council tax, raise our fees and charges, or cut or potentially even stop our vital services that we are currently providing. And when asked if council tax may have to rise by as much as 10%, she said, all options are very much on the table. The public are being asked to foot the bill for public services that are getting worse by the week because this government underfunded councils for 15 years. First Minister, why are people across Scotland being asked to pay more for less?
First Minister.
Well, that is not the case, but let me repeat the offer I've made to Anna Sarwar. We will, as a Parliament, debate the budget for next year at Stage 1 this afternoon. The budget proposals will then go through the other stages before the budget is passed by Parliament as a whole. Now, we have put forward a balanced budget. We've allocated all of the resources we have at our disposal. Within that budget, we are increasing local government resources by over £500 million. But if Anna Sarwar is saying that he thinks local government should get more money than that, then let him bring forward that proposal, but also tell us, because there is no unallocated pot of cash, tell us where we should take the extra money from. Should it be from the National Health Service? Should it be from the police? Should it be from the central government education budgets? These are real questions that if Anna Sarwar is standing here arguing for a bigger increase for local government, which is legitimate, he has a right to do that, but if he wants to be taken seriously, he also has to say where that money should come from. So I'm waiting. I'm open to any suggestion that Anna Sarwar wants to make.
Anna Sarwar.
What the First Minister wants to ignore is all the waste this government is doing, the vanity projects, the money hidden behind the sofa for the deal for the Greens, all that cuts that they've had right across this country. She knows that she has taken the decisions that have slashed council budgets because for 15 years the SNP have underfunded councils. Even when her ministers had more money to spend.
Let's hear Mr.
And now
Sarwar.
people across Scotland are facing the double whammy of increased income taxes and hikes in council tax. That means taxes will go up, not just for the richest, but almost every household in Scotland, but services will still be cut. And now a leaked COSLA document reveals potential job losses on a massive scale. They estimate over 7,000 jobs will be lost. 7,000. And this is what council leaders in her own party say. This budget settlement will have a detrimental impact on vital local services. It will lead to the loss of jobs both within local authorities and within the local companies who supply goods and services to councils. After 15 years of command and control, things have gone so bad that many of Nicola Sturgeon's own colleagues are no longer willing to blindly follow the orders. Her MPs have lost faith in the strategy. Her councillors have lost faith in her decisions, and now her MSPs face a choice. Will they vote through these cuts, or will they finally stand up for their local communities?
First Minister.
The problem for Anna Sarwar is the verdict of the Scottish people that matters, which is why I'm standing here and he is sitting over there. But Anna Sarwar has just demonstrated there, I think, that he does not yet deserve to be taken seriously in these exchanges, because, absolutely correct to say that these are really difficult times for local government, as they are for central government when it comes to the allocation of resources. We have put a draft budget before Parliament, and I stress that word, draft budget. Parliament is about to debate it. So if there is, and all of the resources we have are allocated within that draft budget. So if it is Anna Sarwar's proposition that he would like to see more money go to local government, then that is a legitimate proposal to make. But he has to say where he wants us to take that money from, because it would have to come from the National Health Service or the police budget or other budgets. So Anna Sarwar has the opportunity, and I will wait to hear whether this proposition comes from Labour this afternoon. If he wants us to increase the allocation to local government, he has to see us reduce the allocation to some other part of our budget. So let us know where he thinks that should come from, and then perhaps we can have a proper grown-up discussion other than the one that he has just had us have this afternoon.
Question number 3, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, when we are told to run from danger, our emergency workers run towards it. And last week, Edinburgh firefighter Barry Martin did just that and paid the ultimate price for so doing. I hope that the First Minister will join me in paying tribute to Barry and support our efforts to see him posthumously awarded the George Cross, the highest award for civilian gallantry. to ask the First Minister when the Cabinet will next meet.
First Minister.
The Cabinet will meet on Tuesday. Presiding Officer, can I also take the opportunity to convey my deepest condolences to the family, the friends and the colleagues of firefighter Barry Martin. He typifies the bravery and the courage of all of our emergency service workers, but in particular our firefighters. I have written to firefighter Martin's family, but the thoughts of everyone across the chamber are very much with them at this time. And I hope at this horrendously sad time for them, they will take some comfort from the love that has been expressed from all who knew and worked with Barry.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I am particularly grateful for that reply. Can I remind the Chamber that my wife is a primary school teacher and a member of the EIS. Presiding Officer, after the disruption of the pandemic, we have calculated that Scotland's school pupils have now lost over 2 million days of education due to strike action. That will double if an agreement is not reached. Today it's Dundee and Argyll and Bute. Tomorrow it's South Lanarkshire and the Western Isles. Teachers care deeply about their pupils, and closing the gates is the last thing that they want to do. But the last pay offer was made to them back in November, and there has been nothing new since. Presiding Officer, this generation of young people has had it harder than any other, and life-qualifying exams are coming over the horizon. Waiting for teachers to buckle or inflation to fall is not a strategy. So can I ask the First Minister, what will she do personally to keep those school gates open?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, can I agree that no one, and I certainly don't want to see disruption or any further disruption to children's education. Alex Cole-Hamilton is right to point to the disruption that COVID caused to children and young people. Can I also share and echo the respect he has expressed for our teachers? I very much hope we will reach a resolution and a pay agreement soon that avoids further disruption, but it is important that that continues to be discussed and negotiated through the mechanisms that are in place. The final thing I would say, and I've said this before, the government is not simply digging its heels in. Any resolution has to be fair and it has to be affordable. And I think we can point to the fact that we don't simply dig our heels in to other pay negotiations where we have managed to reach resolutions that have avoided industrial action in other public services. So we will continue to seek that fair and affordable resolution with teachers that continues to reward them for the excellent work that they do.
Question number 4, Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what discussions the Scottish Government has had with COSLA with regard to proposals in some local authorities to reduce teacher numbers, given its commitment to increase teacher numbers by 3,500 by end of the current parliamentary session.
First Minister.
Well, I am very firmly of the view that a reduction in teacher numbers would not be in keeping with our commitment to raise attainment and close the attainment gap in our schools. Indeed, as Christine Graham has set out, this government is committed to recruiting additional teachers and classroom assistants. We have provided an additional £145.5 million in this year's budget, specifically to recruit additional teachers. That funding will also be included in next year's budget for councils as part of our ongoing commitments on teacher numbers. Deputy First Minister and the Education Secretary met with local government representatives on Tuesday to discuss how we best deliver on this commitment and also protect learning hours. And the Education Secretary will set out further steps to the Scottish Parliament over the coming days.
Christine Graham.
I thank the First Minister for her answer. As a former secondary teacher myself some time ago, I have huge regard for the commitment of the profession and indeed benefited as someone from a working class background to state education through to university. But context is all, and budgets are under severe pressure as a result of 10% inflation at Scottish and local government level, with the same pressures in Wales and England where teachers are on strike. The issue of funding for education is not a Scottish Government problem, it's a UK-wide one and a direct consequence of raging inflation which Anas Sarwar, in his exchange with the First Minister, sidestepped. Is it not time, First Minister, that Rishi Sunak ditched his current policy of austerity to tackle their own self-inflicted inflation, increased funding to this government and Wales while they're at it, dealing with the fallout of a decade of failed Tory policies,
exacerbated by Brexit.
Thank you.
A revolving
Graham,
door of
please
4
draw
Tory
your question to a
councillors in 1
close.
year, and who could forget Liz Truss?
First Minister.
Christine Graham is absolutely correct, and the discomfort on the Conservative benches was palpable while she was speaking. I also detected a bit of discomfort in the Labour benches. I'm not quite so sure why that should be the case. But the fact of the matter is the budget that this government works within is constrained by decisions taken by UK governments who still hold most of the financial levers. But within that, we are doing everything we can to protect public services and secure the fairest possible pay deals for those who work within our public services. But Christine Graham is right. This Parliament, this government would be able to do so much more if Rishi Sunak loosened the purse strings, started to negotiate fair pay deals with public sector workers in England and increase funding to the devolved administrations. And surely that's something all of us across this chamber should unite to call for.
Stephen Kerr.
Well, what we have heard is a bizarre question followed by a bizarre answer. This is a bizarre situation that only Nicola Sturgeon could have concocted. The SNP government now reportedly threatening to sanction local councils because of SNP underfunding. The First Minister is forcing councils to choose between deep cuts to local services or above-inflation tax increases. Or how exactly does she expect them to pay for her commitment to increase teacher numbers?
First Minister.
It's only a couple of weeks that the member's leader in this Parliament was saying that the government had to ensure there was no reductions to teacher numbers. So I think the Tories should make up their minds which side they are on. But if Stephen Kerr wants this government to allocate more resources to local government or to any other part of the public service, then either he, like I challenged Anna Sarwar to do earlier on, has to tell us where that money should come from, or perhaps they should call on their bosses at Westminster to deliver more funding for the devolved administrations. And finally, Presiding Officer, they should probably drop their call for tax cuts for the richest in our society. I saw, I think, Liz Smith just this morning say that one of the priorities for the Scottish Government in our budget should be to narrow the tax gap between Scotland and the rest of the UK. That tax gap is because we are asking those who earn the most to pay a bit more, which obviously means the Tories still want to see tax cuts for the richest, which would reduce funding for public services. There's no consistency or principle whatsoever coming from the Tory benches.
Question number 5, Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what schemes the Scottish Government has in place to support disabled people with the energy costs of running life-saving and independent living equipment at home.
First Minister.
High energy prices, along with the wider cost of living crisis, are causing extreme challenges for many people right now. We provide a range of disability benefits to help disabled people and those with long-term conditions. The Child Winter Heating Assistance and Carers Allowance Supplement are providing financial support available only in Scotland, as does our new winter heating payment, which will begin in a few weeks' time. We've also doubled the Fuel Insecurity Fund to £20 million, and some patients using haemodialysis or oxygen equipment at home are already accessing financial support. It is, of course, deeply regrettable that the UK Government is cutting the support provided to hard-pressed families from the end of March. I hope they will reverse this decision, and I hope members across the chamber will call on them to do so and continue to provide the assistance that households so badly need at this time.
Jeremy Balfour.
First Minister, Presiding Officer, given the cost of running life-saving equipment such as a ventilator can reach as much as £750 a month, does the First Minister agree that the energy costs are putting the health and human rights of disabled people at risk? And will the Scottish Government commit to an urgent meeting with myself, stakeholders, to discuss urgent action to support families to run life-saving and independent living equipment?
First Minister.
I'm happy to ask the relevant Minister to take part in such a meeting, and we'd be happy to discuss what more the Scottish Government can do. I do agree with Jeremy Balfour about the impact of sky-high energy costs, which is why I think the UK Government that holds the levers here really has to do much more to help people with the impact of those sky-high energy costs. This Government is doing everything we can within our powers and resources. I've pointed to the range of disability benefits that we provide, and also in particular the doubling of the Fuel Insecurity Fund to £20 million, which will help some of those dealing with the kind of impacts that Jeremy Balfour sets out. So we will continue to look at what more we can do, but it really does need to be the UK Government here that acts to deal with the root causes of rising energy prices, but also takes action now to help those dealing with the impact of them.
Paul O'Kane.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We know that the cost of living crisis is being felt most acutely by those with caring responsibilities or those in receipt of care. The Scottish Government commissioned the independent review of adult social care, which included a recommendation to scrap non-residential care charges, but we know that action has not been forthcoming to deliver that recommendation. The removal of non-residential social care charges would overnight improve the lives of over 100,000 people in Scotland by relieving the financial pressure on their households. So I will ask the First Minister, why has she failed to listen to the experts like Derek Feely and scrap non-residential care charges?
First Minister.
The commitment we gave on that, and I agree this is an important issue, was to achieve that over the course of this parliamentary term, and we're currently looking to see how quickly that might be possible within the financial constraints that we are talking about. I absolutely recognise how important an issue this is, but we have to deal within the budgets that we have. I repeat again what I said to Anna Sarwar earlier on. Within the context of the budget for next year, if any member wants to propose additional funding for any line in that budget, then they are of course entitled to do so, but they have to accompany that with an explanation of where they think those additional resources should come from. That's the hard part of setting budgets, and oppositions who want to propose extra money for parts of the budget really cannot escape that responsibility.
Question number 6, Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to research commissioned by Citizens Advice Scotland, reportedly finding that people are struggling to afford everyday goods, including period and hygiene products, and the energy costs associated with showering, bathing and laundry due to the cost of living crisis.
First Minister.
We remain very concerned about the hardship people are facing right now due to the cost of living crisis, which of course is not yet abating. The majority of the key policy levers are of course held by the UK Government, including those related to energy bills. We will continue to press the UK Government to use all of the levers at their disposal to tackle this emergency on the scale that is required. In the meantime, we will continue to do all we can to help households within the limited budgets and powers that we have. We have allocated almost £3 billion in this financial year on initiatives to help people with the cost of living crisis, and that includes £1 billion that provides services and support that is not available anywhere else in the UK. As I said in response to the previous question, we've also doubled the Fuel Insecurity Fund to £20 million this year, and recently announced £2.4 million for action to help tackle food insecurity.
Monica Lennon.
I thank the First Minister for her response. I'll follow up on 2 points on levers that we do have here. Since the Period Products Act took legal effect last August, I think we've all been hugely impressed by the work being done by council, schools and others to make free period products widely available. Along with period dignity campaigners, I'm keen to meet with the Social Justice Cabinet Secretary to discuss ways to build on this success, so that we can raise more awareness and help the people highlighted in this Citizens Advice Scotland survey. And secondly, we all know that rip-off energy bills are exploiting people and putting their lives at risk. The whole rotten system needs to be dismantled, but in the meantime, people do need urgent support. Can the First Minister guarantee that everyone who is due the winter heating payment in Scotland will receive it this month?
First Minister.
Social Security Scotland is taking forward the rollout of
benefits, and of course it is always the priority to make sure that people get benefits to which they are entitled as quickly as possible. In terms of wider issues around energy bills, I've covered that in response to a previous question, but it is important that we continue to consider everything we can do, but the key levers here do lie with the UK Government. On the issue of period poverty, I think all of us across this chamber, and Monica Lennon clearly was a key person in this, should be proud of the progress around tackling period poverty. She's right to point to the progress that has been made, but she's also right to say that we should collectively look at how we now build on that. So I know the Social Justice Secretary would be happy to meet with her and campaigners to discuss exactly how we take that forward. And I hope on this, if perhaps not on many other issues that we discuss in this chamber, we can build some real consensus for the future.
We move to constituency and general supplementaries, and I call Natalie Dawn.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. New analysis by the International Monetary Fund has found that the UK is set to be the only major economy to shrink in 2023, with all other developed nations experiencing growth. Even sanction-hit Russia. This, on top of everything else, will severely impact on devolved nations and our responsibilities. Why does the First Minister think that the UK is performing so poorly compared to other economies? Could it be the perfect storm of Westminster economic incompetence and a disastrous Brexit that Scotland didn't vote for?
First Minister. Natalie Dawn is absolutely right. And again, there is real discomfort, perhaps not surprisingly, from the Tory branches. Perhaps they've just seen that another consequence of Tory economic and financial incompetence and mismanagement is that interest rates have just been increased yet again by the Bank of England, which has real implications for people. But the forecast by the IMF is deeply worrying, but it should come as no surprise. The Scottish Government and others in Scotland have repeatedly warned that Brexit, and particularly the hard Brexit chosen by the UK Government, would be devastating to the economy of Scotland and to the UK as a whole. The economic impacts are already being felt. Britain's GDP was 5.5% lower by the second quarter of 2022 than it would have been had Brexit not occurred. The consequences of this economic incompetence are devastating for businesses and for individuals alike. And thanks to Brexit, the UK is facing a worse cost of living crisis than elsewhere.
Briefly,
so
First Minister.
That's the reality, and I think it's time that the UK Government and indeed the main opposition at UK level woke up to that fact and abandoned the disaster that has been Brexit.
Thank you, First Minister. I call Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The British Heart Foundation are here in Parliament today to raise awareness of the importance of learning CPR. My constituent Stephanie Bain had to perform CPR on her 5-week-old baby after he stopped breathing in his cot. Neither Stephanie or her partner knew how to do CPR on a baby, and I can only imagine how terrifying it must have been for them and their family. The family is now urging parents to learn vital first aid skills that could save the lives of their young children. My office has been in touch with Stephanie, and I am pleased that Finlay is now doing well. I've also reached out to the British Heart Foundation to encourage them to create digital content showing parents how to perform CPR on children under the age of 1. First Minister, as February is Heart Month, will you support the campaign to ensure everyone, especially parents, has access to CPR training, as it does save lives?
First Minister.
Yes, I will. I'm very happy to give my support to that campaign. Let me also welcome the British Heart Foundation to Parliament today and commend the organisation for the excellent work that it does. The work it does, I know, has an impact on families across Scotland, and we're very grateful to them for that. I think it is important that we work to raise awareness of and education and training about CPR. I understand the British Heart Foundation itself has an online tool about CPR, Revive R, and that's important, but there is clearly more work we can all do collectively, and I'm happy to give my support to that and to consider what more the Scottish Government can do to support these efforts.
Faisal Chowdhury.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Muirhouse Millennium Centre in my region is facing financial difficulty, and several meetings have now been held to address their concern about the lack of future core funding, which could mean the risk of closure. When community centres are not funded properly, It is not just the centre who loses out. The families who depend on them for support and help, particularly during the cost of living crisis, are left without a lifeline. Will the First Minister increase funding to local authorities to ensure that they have the necessary funds to support essential community centres such as the Muirhouse Millennium Centre?
First Minister.
Well, I know from my own constituency the importance of community centres and community facilities more generally, so I certainly agree with the sentiment being expressed. Clearly, the individual issue raised is one for the local council. In terms of the central request, will the Scottish Government increase further the allocation to local councils? I said earlier on, the draft budget already proposes an increase in resources to local government of more than £500 million. But as I said to the member's leader some moments ago, if Labour want to further increase that allocation, then they are entitled to put forward that proposition, but they need to point to the line in the budget where they think we should take that money from. And we'll await this afternoon and for the remainder of the budget process to see whether any balanced proposals in that regard come from the Labour benches. But I will not be holding my breath based on the experience of past years.
Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week marks the 3rd anniversary of Brexit, and last night in the BBC we heard Dr Donald McCaskill of Scottish Care outline the devastating impact it's having on our social care and health centre. Dr McCaskill said, "We have lost thousands of frontline staff because of Brexit and an immovable visa system and immigration system from Westminster." Does the First Minister agree with Dr McCaskill? And if so, what does she think needs to happen to secure a better future for the sectors?
First Minister.
Yes, I do agree with Donald McCaskill, and I think his comments last night were very clear when he did say that we've lost thousands of frontline staff in nursing and in direct social care because of Brexit and because of the visa and immigration system from Westminster. Of course, the wider cost crisis also has an impact. We need, as a country, in my view, to find a way back to Europe. We need, as a country, to find a way of ensuring that we have an immigration system that is not just humane, but that meets our social and economic needs. It is clear, and it's becoming clearer every day, that Scotland will not find either of those things as part of the Westminster system of government. The route to both of them is through Scotland becoming an independent country.
Maurice Golden.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Incredibly, there is still no operational blueprint for deposit return, despite the scheme launching in just a few months' time. No wonder businesses are tearing their hair out. Retailers are investing £250 million in the scheme this year alone, but they are being forced to take a best guess at how it is going to work. The Scottish Retail Consortium is now calling for a complete operational blueprint to be released by the end of the month. Can the First Minister confirm that will happen, yes or no?
First Minister.
Circularity Scotland continues to work with businesses as they finalise operational delivery plans ahead of the launch in August, and it of course is developing and constructing the logistical network that will support the effective operation of the scheme. I will ask Lorna Slater, the relevant Minister, to write further to the member to set out further details of the steps being taken between now and launch in August.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last night it was confirmed that the Government cannot guarantee that the winter heating payments will be paid this month, and as the First Minister has just said in response to my colleague, they have said that it is DWP data that's the issue. Ministers set the deadline for the DWP to share that necessary data of the 31st of January. The Minister confirmed in committee that the payments would be made in February if they got that data. They did. So can I ask the First Minister, has the Government failed to properly plan for the delivery of this payment? Have they underestimated the time needed to properly execute the policy? And will our constituents get it this month, or will the winter heating payment end up being the Scottish summer payment paid too late to keep people warm this winter?
First Minister.
We will continue, as we have done with all benefits, to ensure that people who are entitled to these benefits get the money timeously. We did receive the data from the DWP, and payments will be made to the 415,000 people eligible for the payment automatically over the course of February and March.
And Ariane Burgess.
Apologies, I meant to unpress my button and not call this question. Apologies, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. There will be a brief pause while the gallery clears before we move on to members' business.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.